Communion controversy. Catholic bishops weigh the message they want to send to pro-abortion politicians. Papal trip to Iraq. We take a look back at the apostolic journey and the Holy Father's message to Christians overseas. Faith and politics. One lawmaker describes the importance of Mother Angelica in his own life story. And the year of St. Joseph. How Catholics are showing devotion to Jesus' foster father. On EWTN News Nightly for Memorial Day, Monday, May 31st, 2021. Welcome to our EWTN News Nightly Memorial Day special. I'm Tracy Sable. During the next half hour, we want to bring you some of our top stories from 2021. We begin with a debate over Holy Communion. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops will soon decide whether President Joe Biden should be allowed to take part in the Eucharist based on his public support for abortion. White House correspondent Owen Jensen filed this report as the president was preparing for his joint address to Congress.
President Joe Biden recently attending Mass at St. Joseph on the Brandywine in Delaware. But his support for Planned Parenthood, revoking the Mexico City policy, and flipping on the Hyde Amendment, among other things, contradict church teaching on protecting human life.
We are all sons and daughters of God.
And come this June, Catholic bishops will decide on whether to develop a document that would demand President Biden and other pro-abortion politicians not receive communion, a public rebuke. Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City, who chairs the USCCB's Committee on Pro-Life Activities, says such a stance by a public figure is a grave moral evil. According to church law, people in persistent sin should not receive communion. During the presidential campaign, a priest in South Carolina denied communion to then-candidate Joe Biden, but critics say denying communion is tantamount to a weaponization of the Eucharist. Meanwhile, tonight, the president lays out before Congress that sweeping proposal with a staggering $1.8 trillion price tag. It includes 2 years of free community college, $225 billion for child care, and monthly payments of at least $250 to parents, and hitting the wealthy with higher taxes.
We're really talking about the very wealthiest in this country paying their fair share in order to make investments in things like universal pre-K and paid family leave.
Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform blasts the tax hikes, writing, Biden wants to take the U.S. business tax higher than China's and Europe and hike the capital gains tax higher than Jimmy Carter.
And that was Owen Jensen reporting for us. He says the bishops where President Joe Biden typically attends Mass have made it clear that he can still receive Holy Communion, even if the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops decides otherwise. Well, the issue of Holy Communion also extends to Congress. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco is speaking out after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi claimed it is entirely up to her if she wants to receive Holy Communion despite her support of abortion. EWTN News Nightly Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales continues our team coverage.
It was during House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's weekly press conference that I asked the House Speaker for reaction about the U.S. Bishops' Conference considering to not let lawmakers who support pro-abortion legislation from receiving communion. The House Speaker, who is Catholic, answered my question with a question.
The U.S. Archbishops and the Bishops' Conference doesn't want to allow you to receive communion. Your reaction to that?
No, I think I can use my own judgment on that, but I'm pleased with what the Vatican put out on that subject. Did you read that?
That'll be up to the individual priests?
No, it basically says don't be divisive.
It's an answer Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco didn't agree with.
The conscience is so misunderstood nowadays. People think it means people can decide for themselves what's right and wrong, when what it really means is knowing what the right thing is to do in a specific situation based on what is right and wrong. So I think this is a big challenge we're facing in the church today.
In a pastoral letter, His Excellency wrote, quote, "We must never lose sight of this fact. In the last 50 years in the United States alone, 66 million babies have been murdered in their mothers' wombs. This is not a matter about which one can use judgment. It's a fact. He wasn't alone. Bishop Donald Hine of the Diocese of Madison, Wisconsin tweeted, quote, Pelosi says she's pleased with Vatican letter to U.S. bishops on communion. So in other words, Nancy, we bishops should just be quiet about your radical pro-abortion stance as you facilitate the continuation of murder of millions of unborn lives? Archbishop Cordileone was thankful the House Speaker did provide funds for churches in the latest PPP funding, but he had this final message for the House Speaker.
Let's be really pro-life, pro-woman, pro-family, and welcome every child as a gift from God and doing everything we can for that child to have a happy upbringing.
It's important to note that I did reach out to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but my emails were never answered. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
We're also excited to cover the Pope's trip to Iraq this year. The Holy Father told Iraqi Christians that he can see firsthand that the church in Iraq is alive and that Christ is at work. He encouraged them to work together for a future of peace and prosperity that leaves no one behind. EWTN Newsroom correspondent Colm Flynn brings us the highlights.
On Saturday, Pope Francis traveled to southern Iraq, arriving in Najaf to visit the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, the most influential Shia Muslim leader who spiritually guides more than 60% of the Iraqi Muslims. During the 45-minute meeting, al-Sistani told Pope Francis that he believes Christians should be able to live in peace in Iraq and enjoy the same rights as all citizens. In response, Pope Francis thanked him for raising his voice in defense of the weakest and the most persecuted. In honor of this historic meeting, the Prime Minister of Iraq announced that March 6th will become a national day of tolerance and coexistence in the country. Pope Francis then travelled to the plain of Ur, which is considered the birthplace of Abraham, to meet with representatives of Christianity, Judaism and Islam. There, the Holy Father said, "This blessed place brings us back to our origins, to the sources of God's work, to the birth of our religions. We seem to have returned home." On Sunday, Pope Francis travelled by helicopter to the city of Mosul, where ISIS first took root and brought the city to its knees during the war. He prayed to the Lord, saying, "Teach us to realize that you have entrusted to us your plan of love, peace and reconciliation." After Mosul, he flew to Karakosh, where he visited the largest Catholic community in Iraq, the Immaculate Conception. The Pope applauded the strength of the Christian community and invited them to trust in God's plan for peace. He said, "The road to a full recovery may still be long, but I ask you, please, not to grow discouraged. What is needed is the ability to forgive, but also the courage not to give up. You are not alone. The Church is with you." Concluding his trip, the Holy Father celebrated Mass with an estimated 18,000 people in Erbil's soccer stadium, where he joined in their love and excitement. He said he came to Iraq to recognize and thank the Christians for their witness of faith. In Rome, Colm Flynn, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have also been following the developments with the coronavirus pandemic. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently relaxed mask-wearing guidelines for fully vaccinated people. Dr. Tom McGovern, co-host of the Dr. EWTN radio show, supports the change and told me it is long overdue.
Basically, they're saying the vaccines work. So if we're vaccinated, we're really not putting people at increased risk of disease. In my practice, we had a conversation among all of us partners on Friday, and as of today, if we've been vaccinated, we don't have to wear a mask at work anymore. My patients got to see my smile for the first time in 14 months today, and it was wonderful.
That is so great. I know we are missing that so much. So do you think that this decision means that we're nearing herd immunity and the end of the pandemic and a return to normal is imminent?
I think we're closer. I think it's all a continuum. I don't think there's a black and white difference. I think there will be what some public health doctors refer to as a tipping point coming. We are close to it, but not quite there. I understand they've passed that tipping point in Israel, where the rate of disease is incredibly low there. I think we need to get more people vaccinated to quite get there, but we are definitely closer. I think what caught people by surprise is that it seems like such an abrupt change instead of a more phased in change, and that may well be what many people are reacting to.
Yeah, and do you know, what, if anything, does this decision mean for houses of worship?
It's funny you asked that. I got the update from the CDC within minutes, first from my friends in public health that we've had on the show, Dr. Doctor, and then from our director of liturgy in the diocese, where I've been acting as a consultant. And by the end of the day Friday, we had written down that pastors could make their own decisions about masks or not. For instance, my parish, my pastor is still uncomfortable releasing anything, but in another one down the road, they're letting people who are vaccinated not wear masks at church. So I think we're practicing subsidiarity now, and it means that churches, depending on what their bishops say, now have the right to ease off. And I think many churches around the country have seen that gradual easing off on restrictions, which I think gives increased hope. I saw more people in my parish yesterday than I've seen in 14 months, and it was a wonderful thing to behold.
That's great. That's so good to hear. Before we let you go, any final thoughts when it comes to the mask wearing or the vaccines, things that we should know?
We've seen the vaccine received by tens of millions of people with rare side effects, and there are virtually no side effects that turn up after 6 weeks post-vaccination. So I think people can be confident that they work, especially the mRNA vaccines, which don't even have the rare blood clotting side effects. Masks do make a difference, but they really don't make much of a difference once you've received the vaccine. So if you're on the fence, get the vaccine. It means more freedom, and those of us who've been vaccinated are enjoying that freedom.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate having you on in your analysis. Dr. Tom McGovern, co-host of the Dr. EWTN radio show and podcast. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Coming up, Refugee Cap. A look at the evolving plans to allow more persecuted people into the United States. And faith and politics. How one lawmaker's Catholic values inspire his desire to protect unborn babies. Welcome back to our Memorial Day special featuring some of our top stories of this year. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops applauds the Biden administration's decision to allow more refugees into the United States. It raised the refugee cap from 15,000 to 62,500. The bishops call it a step in the right direction to help those who need it most. But White House correspondent Owen Jensen says the bishops would like to see that number even higher.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki discussing the administration's new refugee cap numbers just raised after receiving harsh criticism.
He wanted to eliminate any lingering doubt from any refugee across the world that the United States wasn't a country that would welcome refugees in to apply.
For fiscal year 2022, which starts in October, the aim is even higher. 125,000 refugees from places like Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Migration said that number is, quote, a figure more consistent with our values and capabilities as a nation. The committee also wrote, we are in the midst of the greatest forced displacement crisis of our lifetime and know that there are more than 26 million refugees worldwide and more than 47 million people who are internally displaced. It is imperative that we act now to ensure the safety of these individuals and their families.
This is not just a federal government or U.S. government effort. There are so many organizations who play incredible roles.
But the administration also admitted it will not meet the new 62,500 cap by September, blaming the pandemic in part. Meanwhile,
today, 2 months until July 4th,
on the COVID-19 front, July 4th, mark it down. That's when President Biden wants 70% of U.S. adults to have at least one shot. And he wants kids ages 12 to 15 to get vaccinated, too, in time for school this fall.
So my hope is that if the vaccine is authorized, parents will take advantage of it and get their kids vaccinated.
And that was Owen Jensen reporting. Having faith in God is how Representative Jake LaTurner says he lives his life. The sixth-generation Kansas says it is a virtue that he learned early on in life with the help of his grandmother, as well as EWTN's foundress, Mother Angelica. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales interviewed the congressman for our Faith and Politics series.
This night was going to challenge you to be greater, to be more holy.
It was those lessons from Mother Angelica that still resonate in the mind and heart of Congressman Jake LaTurner.
It was on the entire time I was growing up. Yeah, my grandmother watched Mother Angelica every morning of her life and watches daily mass every day still.
Congressman Jake LaTurner says his grandparents, Joe and Ruby, made sure he stayed true to his Catholic faith. Ironically, he says they both grew up not knowing God.
My grandpa was in the Korean War, and while in Korea, lost sight in his left eye. As a result of that, he was shipped to a hospital, Army hospital in Texas.
While healing, his grandfather would help others around the hospital. One day, Joe helped a fellow soldier to Sunday Mass, which changed his life forever.
Fast forward, my grandmother and him get married. They'd been married for a couple of years, and as he put it, something was missing in our life. And it was that experience that led them to the Catholic Church.
A Catholic faith Congressman LaTurner now instills in his family, a faith that believes in protecting the unborn.
Life issues are what brought me into politics. I grew up standing on life chains. My family is very involved in helping candidates who are pro-life win. And I don't think there has been a time since Roe v. Wade where people should be more optimistic than right now.
He prays the U.S. Supreme Court will bring change if and when it is presented with a case involving abortion. Congressman LaTurner says he keeps his spiritual glass full with the help of daily prayer, and he says the only way his life as a congressman works here on Capitol Hill is with the help of his wife, who he calls a superhero, and as long as they keep Christ as the center of their lives. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, story of revival, the massive effort to repair a historic church in the heart of Rome. And devotion to St. Joseph, how Catholic communities around the country are calling on his guidance and intercession. Welcome back to our Memorial Day special, featuring some of our top stories of the year. 5 years ago, Pope Francis signed his apostolic exhortation on the family Amoris Laetitia. To commemorate, the Holy Father announced a special year of the family and dedicated this year to St. Joseph. EWTN News Rome correspondent Colm Flynn takes us to a church in Rome which celebrated more than St. Joseph's feast day.
The Church of St. Joseph the Carpenter overlooks Rome's ancient city centre, known as the Roman Forum. The original church was built on a prison, where it is believed Saints Peter and Paul were both imprisoned. In August of 2018, 2/3 of the roof collapsed, dragging along with it the gilded wooden ceiling and damaging the marble floors. The church was closed at the time, and thankfully no one got hurt. The director of the restoration work, Alessandro Bazzetti, says it was like witnessing the aftermath of an earthquake.
Era veramente un disastro.
Bazzetti says the roof collapsed in an extraordinary way, where many of the architectural frames from the ceiling were intact. But while removing the rubble, the real miracle happened. The face of the Madonna that was carved on the ceiling was found face down on one of the pews. Upon removing a piece of the rubble, they found baby Jesus on the ground, gazing up at his mother, the Virgin Mary.
C'è stata una selezione di tutti gli elementi del cassettonato che venivano puliti in quest'aula.
Pizzetti says the sacred objects were put in the hands of restoration experts and art historians, while architects started to rebuild the roof, decorative ceilings, marble floors, and interior facades. 95% of the statues were restored, and 60% of the architecture was reused. And exactly 1 year after the collapse, they blessed the new roof. And today, on the Feast of St. Joseph, it inaugurates the newly restored church in the heart of Rome. In Rome, Colm Flynn, EWTN News Nightly.
The Holy Father's declaration that this would be the year of St. Joseph comes 150 years after Pope Pius IX declared St. Joseph the patron of the Universal Church. Correspondent Mark Irons shows us the growing devotion to Joseph.
To you, O blessed Joseph, we consecrate our Diocese of St. Petersburg.
From Florida to California, Catholic communities around the country are calling on the guidance and intercession of St. Joseph.
And so it's so important that we turn to him because he wants to help us.
This past weekend on the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, the Diocese of St. Petersburg, Florida consecrated parishes, schools, ministries, and the people of the diocese to St. Joseph. Father Ralph D'Elia says you can place trust in the earthly father of Jesus.
He wants to help us in the same way our family does, in the same way our friends do. And so when we turn to him and we seek his intercession, he leads us to Christ.
Last December, on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, Pope Francis officially announced the following 365 days would make up a year of St. Joseph. In an apostolic letter, he wrote, "Each of us can discover in Joseph the man who goes unnoticed, a daily, discreet, and hidden presence, an intercessor, a support, and a guide in times of trouble."
A lot of amazing witness he gives to Christ, to following Christ.
Daniel Campbell teaches at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver. He says the difficult decisions Joseph made in Scripture, leading Mary and Jesus, show complete trust in God and provide proof of a strong prayer life.
So you don't ever actually read of him sitting down to pray, but it's the inference you can make that the only way you could respond with such absolute simple trust and absolute simple humility is if you are constantly keeping the presence of God and constantly in conversation with him.
In honor of this special year, Campbell will teach an online summer class focused on St. Joseph. It's open to people around the world.
Bottom line, I just hope people love St. Joseph and really take him as a patron.
And many Catholics, including student members of the Knights of Columbus at the University of Notre Dame, are entrusting themselves to St. Joseph's care this year by making a 33-day consecration. It involves short readings and prayers.
He's like the epitome of a strong Catholic man.
12 months prior to Pope Francis declaring this a year of St. Joseph, the Diocese of Charlotte had announced its own special year in honor of the foster father of Jesus. We asked Monsignor Patrick Winslow, the Vicar General and Chancellor of the Diocese, about the impact of the saint's intercession.
I think that the fruits that we experience are growth. We've been experiencing a tremendous amount of growth since the founding of our diocese.
What would you say to other dioceses that are considering consecrating themselves to St. Joseph?
Well, I would say that he's a good friend in heaven to have on your side. Certainly he is for the Universal Church, but invoking him on a local level will always be to your benefit.
Since becoming prior of the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. 4 years ago, Father Aquinas Gilbo says his devotion to St. Joseph has increased.
And having to run a community and a religious community, one focused on the Lord, also a community dedicated to Our Lady. My thoughts just went naturally to St. Joseph, like, how do I do this? You know.
Father Gilbo prays each morning in a small chapel dedicated to Joseph. He says we can rely on the saint just as Christ did as a child in Joseph's care.
He himself goes to Joseph. He places his infant self, under Joseph's protection.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
And we thank you for watching our Memorial Day special. We hope you enjoyed our look back at some of the top stories of this year. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.